Eleanor Hadley sat in the passenger seat of a borrowed Buick at the curb in front of what had been her house for 41 years, watching her son Vance carry a box of her belongings down the front steps and set it on the lawn beside two suitcases and a cardboard file box. The October light was thin and white and unforgiving, the kind of late-morning light that makes everything look older than it is. Her son did not look at her through the windshield. He turned and went back inside. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. On her lap was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope was a deed to a lighthouse on Wrack Point that had not been operational since 1984, a key on a brass ring, and a single typed page on her daughter Adrienne's law firm letterhead, listing the property as the entirety of her inheritance from her late father, Captain Thomas Whitlock. Eleanor was 73 years old. She had 2 adult children. She no longer had a husband or a house or a car or any meaningful amount of money in her checking account. She had the lighthouse. She had a friend named Doris Pelletier in the driver's seat beside her. She had what was in those suitcases and boxes on the lawn, which Vance was bringing out one by one because that was how the morning had been arranged. Doris had not started the car yet. She was waiting for Eleanor to nod, the way she had been waiting all morning for Eleanor to give her a sign that something different from this could be done. Eleanor had not given the sign because there was nothing different that could be done. She was being moved out of her own home, in the legal sense, by her own children, in the practical sense. The only place she had been left to go was the lighthouse her father had bequeathed her, which Adrienne had called more sentimental than valuable in the phone conversation 3 days earlier, when Eleanor had asked, with what dignity she could find, what exactly her share of her father's estate would be. Sentimental. Eleanor had been hearing that word for 2 years. She had begun to hear it the spring after Walter died, when Adrienne first sat down at her kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a tone of professional concern and explained that elderly homeowners often fell prey to scams and overcharges and confusion about their finances, and that Eleanor would benefit from having someone with legal training help her organize her affairs. Adrienne was 38 and a junior partner at a small estate planning firm in Portland, and the word affairs had come out of her mouth with the practiced ease of someone who used it 10 times a day. Eleanor had agreed, because Adrienne was her daughter, and because she did sometimes have trouble understanding the new statements from the new bank that had bought out her old bank, and because Walter had handled all of that for 41 years and Walter was now buried under a granite headstone in the cemetery at the Congregational Church on Route 1. Sentimental was how Adrienne had described the lighthouse 3 days earlier. Sentimental was how Vance had described Eleanor's wedding china the previous winter, when he had explained that the apartment he and his wife Brenna had just moved into didn't really suit traditional pieces, and that Eleanor should let them sell it for her so that the proceeds could be added to her care account. Sentimental was how Adrienne had described the engagement ring Walter had given Eleanor in 1971, which had been reset by Brenna's jeweler in Portland for what Adrienne had assured Eleanor was a very reasonable fee and which had then never come back, the jeweler having apparently gone out of business in some manner that no one could quite explain. Sentimental, in Eleanor's children's mouths, had become a way of describing things that were about to leave her possession. She watched Vance carry out a 4th box. He set it down on the lawn and stood for a moment with his hands on his hips, looking at the suitcases and the boxes the way you look at a job that is almost done. He was 41 years old. He had her father's coloring, dark hair gone silver at the temples too early, his father's height. He had been a serious, attentive child. He had been her favorite for the first decade of his life, though she had never said so, would not have said so even under interrogation, because you do not tell a mother she has a favorite child even when it is true. He had grown into a man who managed regional sales for a medical device company and who had 2 daughters Eleanor had not seen in over a year, ostensibly because the girls' schedules were busy with activities, in reality because some decision had been made somewhere along the line that Eleanor was not to be a daily part of their lives anymore. He turned and looked at the car. He held up one finger, the gesture meaning one more box, and went back inside. Eleanor, Doris said, "I'm all right. You don't have to be all right. I know." Doris was 71, had been Eleanor's neighbor on Sycamore Lane for 35 years, had been widowed in the same year as Eleanor by a different cancer, and was the only person in Eleanor's life who had not, at some point in the past 18 months, suggested that Eleanor was perhaps confused or perhaps overreacting or perhaps in need of professional supervision. Doris had been the one to drive Eleanor home from the hospital the night Walter died, sitting up at the kitchen table with her until 3 in the morning while Eleanor cried, and then did not cry, and then cried again. Doris was the one Eleanor had called the previous evening, after Adrienne had explained on the phone that the closing on the house was the day after tomorrow being today, and that Vance and his family were going to take temporary possession of the contents until alternative arrangements could be made for Eleanor's relocation to the appropriate facility. The appropriate facility, Eleanor had repeated, sitting on the edge of her bed with the cordless phone pressed to her ear. "We've talked about this, Mom. We've talked around it. Vance and I are doing the best we can with what we have." "What we have," Eleanor had said. "What I have, Adrienne. The house is mine. The accounts are mine. I am still living in this house, and you are telling me that strangers are buying it the day after tomorrow." There had been a small, professional pause on Adrienne's end. "Mom," Adrienne had said, "you signed the closing documents 3 weeks ago." Eleanor had not said anything. "At the kitchen table," Adrienne had said, "with me and Brenna there. We went over every page. You read them. You initialed them." "I don't remember that." "That's exactly what we've been worried about, Mom." The conversation had ended shortly after that. Eleanor had sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. Then she had called Doris. She did remember, in fact, signing some papers at the kitchen table. She remembered Brenna pouring her a glass of wine before they began, and Adrienne explaining that they were updating some of Eleanor's beneficiary designations and consolidating some accounts to make things simpler. She remembered Adrienne pointing with a pen to the lines that needed her signature. She remembered Brenna refilling her wine glass once. She did not remember reading the documents word for word. She had trusted her daughter, the way you trust your daughter, because she was your daughter. She had learned, over the past 3 days, that she had signed away the house, that she had signed away her access to the joint account where her Social Security and Walter's pension survivor benefits were deposited, that she had signed a durable power of attorney, making Adrienne her decision-maker for all financial matters. She had learned all of this only because she had asked the question, on the phone 3 days ago, of what exactly her father had left her, and Adrienne had been forced, by the directness of the question, to admit that the answer to that question was tangled up in a much larger set of answers about other matters. The other matters had taken 3 days to extract. Now, in the car, watching Vance bring out a 5th box, Eleanor put her hand on the manila envelope in her lap and felt for the brass key inside. She could feel it through the paper, the shape of it solid and small. The key to the lighthouse. The key to whatever was inside the lighthouse, which Adrienne had said was nothing of value, which Adrienne had said had been used as a storage shed by their grandfather in his final years, which Adrienne had said could be sold for the assessed land value once Eleanor had visited and confirmed she did not want it for some sentimental reason. Vance came down the steps a final time, this time without a box, and walked over to the passenger window. Eleanor rolled it down because the alternative was to make him knock. "That's everything," he said. "Thank you, Vance." "Mom." He paused. He was a careful speaker, her son. He had learned this from his father, who had been a careful speaker. "I want you to know we're going to figure out something more permanent. The arrangement for tonight is just for tonight. Adrienne and I are going to look at some places this week. I have somewhere to go." He blinked. "You do?" "The lighthouse," she said. "My father's lighthouse. Adrienne told me it was mine." Something happened in his face. It was small. It was a recalibration of the kind a careful speaker performs when an unscripted line has been delivered. "Mom, that's not." He stopped. He started again. "That place isn't habitable. It hasn't been used in decades. It has a roof." "Mom, it has a roof and walls and a door," and Adrienne herself said the structure is sound. "She told me last spring, when she was explaining what the property assessment came back at." He looked past her at Doris in the driver's seat. He did not say hello to Doris, did not acknowledge her. Doris looked straight ahead through the windshield with the carefully blank expression of a person who has decided not to be involved in a particular conversation. "Mom," Vance said, lowering his voice, "you cannot drive up to Wrack Point and move into a decommissioned lighthouse. That isn't a plan. That's—" He stopped. He could not, apparently, find the word for what it was. "Doris is driving me," Eleanor said. "I won't be alone." We'll figure out what's there. And then I'll let you and your sister know what I've decided." She rolled up the window. She heard Vance say her name once more through the glass. She did not turn. After a moment, Doris started the car and pulled away from the curb, and Eleanor watched her house, the white Cape Cod with the green shutters that Walter had repainted the summer before he got sick, recede in the side mirror until they turned the corner and it was gone. She did not cry on the way out of town. She had cried already. She had cried the night Adrienne had explained about the closing, and she had cried the morning she had walked through the rooms of her house for the last time, touching things she would not be allowed to take with her, the cherry sideboard Walter's mother had given them, the rocking chair where she had nursed both her children, the framed photograph of Walter at 50 in his garden in summer. She had cried until she had stopped crying, and now she was past the crying part, into the part of grief that is not grief, exactly, but is more like the steady, alert exhaustion of being awake in a country you don't recognize. The drive to Wrack Point was 3.5 hours by the coastal route, which was the route Doris had chosen without consultation, because the coastal route had towns and diners and rest stops, and the long stretches of inland highway did not. They stopped in Damariscotta a little after 1 in the afternoon at a diner Doris remembered from a trip with her husband in the late 1990s. The diner was still there. The menu had changed. The girl at the counter was 18 years old and did not know where the bathroom was when Eleanor asked, having only worked there for a week. Eleanor used the bathroom and then sat down across from Doris in a vinyl booth by the window and ordered a tuna salad sandwich, which she ate half of without registering the flavor. "When did you last see it?" Doris asked. "The Lighthouse." "Yes." Eleanor put down her sandwich and thought about this. The question caught her in a tender place, because the answer was a long time ago, and she had not let herself think about precisely how long until that moment. "I was 12, she said. 12. My father had it until last year. But I stopped going when I was 12. "Why?" Eleanor turned her water glass a quarter turn on the table. "My mother and father divorced the summer I turned 12. My mother had me. My father stayed at the Lighthouse. I saw him in summers, twice a year, until I was 20. After that, less often. After that, almost never." She had said this calmly because she had said versions of it to therapists in her 30s and to herself in her 40s, and the words no longer had the kind of charge that made you cry in restaurants. They had a different charge now. A late charge. The charge of a debt you had not realized you had been carrying. Doris did not say anything. Doris was a person who knew when not to say anything. "My father remarried when I was 16, Eleanor said. "A woman from Bangor. They had no children. She died about 10 years ago. He was alone at the Lighthouse for the last 10 years of his life, and I knew that, and I did not go to see him." She paused. "I sent cards. I called on his birthday." "He didn't visit you either, Eleanor." "No. That goes 2 ways." "It does." The waitress came back and asked if they wanted dessert. They did not want dessert. Doris paid the check, because Eleanor's wallet contained $83 in cash and 3 credit cards that had been canceled the previous week by automatic withdrawals she had not initiated, and Doris had simply taken over the practical matter of money the same way she had taken over the practical matter of driving, without making it a conversation. In the parking lot, Eleanor leaned against the side of the Buick and looked at the sky over the river. The October sky was a hard, clear blue. The trees along the inlet had turned. She had spent her entire adult life within driving distance of this town and had not driven north of Damariscotta in 51 years. Her father had been alive for 46 of those years. She had not gone to see him in any of them. There were reasons. She had told herself the reasons many times. He had been the one who left her mother. He had been the distant one. He had been the one who, on her wedding day to Walter in 1971, had given a brief, stiff speech about responsibility and partnership that had embarrassed her in front of his new wife and her new in-laws. He had been the one who had not held his grandchildren when they were small, who had sent generic checks at Christmas, who had not come to Walter's funeral because he was 81 and the drive was too far, even though the drive was not too far, even though he could have hired a car if he had wanted to. He had been the one she had decided, at some point in her 30s, was not going to be a meaningful part of her life. She had decided this, and he had not protested, and the decision had calcified into the way things were. Now he was dead, and she was driving to his lighthouse because her own children had left her nowhere else to go. Doris was watching her over the top of the car. "Eleanor." "I'm coming." She got in. They drove. The road to Wrack Point was paved for the first 12 miles after they turned off the coastal route. Then it became gravel for 2 miles, then dirt for the last mile. A single lane through scrub pine and bayberry that ran out finally at a turning circle on a rocky shelf above the ocean. The lighthouse stood at the seaward edge of the shelf, a square stone tower 30 feet high. A wood-shingled keeper's cottage attached to its base on the landward side. A small outbuilding that had once been a fog signal house, now padlocked. The ocean below the cliff was the color the ocean is on a clear October afternoon on the coast of Maine, which is a color most people who have not seen it would not believe. Doris stopped the car at the edge of the turning circle and turned off the engine, and they sat for a minute and looked. "Eleanor," Doris said softly. "I know. It's beautiful. I know." She had not been prepared for it to be beautiful. She had been prepared, after Adrienne's descriptions, for something derelict and uninhabitable. She had been prepared for shame, for the practical question of whether to drive back and ask Doris to put her up on a couch for a few nights while she figured out what to do. The lighthouse was none of those things. The tower was clean. The cottage had recently been painted, the dark green trim around the windows fresh enough to still show the brush strokes. There was a small kitchen garden along the south wall of the cottage, dead now in October, but laid out with care, the stakes still in place, the wire fence intact. Someone had been keeping it up. Eleanor got out of the car. She walked to the front door of the cottage. The brass key from the envelope was in her pocket. The door had a deadbolt and an older keyed knob. She tried the key in both. It fit the deadbolt. The door opened into a mudroom with a stone floor and wooden pegs along the wall, and a coat hanging on one of the pegs, a heavy oilskin that she recognized in a sudden cold way as her father's. The same coat he had worn the last time she had seen him, in 1979, at a cousin's funeral in Belfast. The coat was old and stiff and faintly green, and the smell that came off it when she touched it was salt and tar, and the particular kind of pipe tobacco he had smoked. She closed her eyes. Doris had come up behind her on the steps. "Eleanor, it's all right. She gestured at the coat. It was his. "Oh, I'm all right." She stepped past the coat into the main room of the cottage. The main room was a single space about 20 feet long, with a stone fireplace at one end, a kitchen along the back wall, a sitting area in front of the fireplace, and a small dining table by the window that faced the sea. Everything was clean, not the kind of clean of a house that had been recently dusted, the kind of clean of a house that had been recently lived in. There was no dust on the table. The fireplace had a small stack of ash in it, recently swept. The water in the kettle on the stove, when she lifted the kettle, was still in the bottom of it, evaporated down to a quarter-inch, but still there. Someone had been here within the last few weeks. "Eleanor," Doris said, "did anyone tell you someone else was using the place?" "No. Could it be a caretaker?" Adrienne never mentioned one. Doris walked around the room with the careful, unintrusive movement of a person who has been a guest in many houses and knows how to be a guest. She paused at the small dining table by the window. There was a single mug on the table, upside down on a saucer, as if someone had washed it after their last cup of tea and set it to dry and never come back for it. Eleanor went to the kitchen. The kitchen cabinets were full, not stocked, the way a person stocks a vacation cottage with canned goods. Full. There were spices in glass jars labeled in pencil in a hand she recognized immediately as her father's. There was flour in a tin. There was a half-used bag of coffee beans, the kind you grind yourself, the bag rolled down and clipped. There was a small bowl of apples on the counter, 2 of them still firm to the touch. Her father had died on February 19th. It was now late October. 8 months. Someone had been here in October. Someone had eaten the apples in this bowl and washed the mug in the sink and walked out the door not very long ago. Whoever it was had a key. She felt a small, clean wedge of fear, the way you feel fear in a strange house when you are not quite alone in it. "Doris," she said. "I see it. What do I do?" "You sit down." Doris pulled out a chair at the dining table, and Eleanor sat down. Doris went and got the suitcases and boxes from the car, one at a time, and brought them in and set them in the mudroom. She did this without speaking. She came back into the main room and sat down across from Eleanor at the table. "All right," Doris said. "Here's what I think. Someone has been using this house. Whoever it is, they are taking care of it. That is, to be plain with you, the work of a person who cares about the place. So either it's a friend of your father's who has been keeping the lights on, so to speak, or it is a person who has assumed, after your father's death, that the place is empty and has been using it. Either way, you have a right to be here. The deed is in your name. The key is in your hand. We can call the sheriff and have someone come out tomorrow. But for tonight, I think we should make a fire, eat something, and lock the doors. All right. Are you all right? I will be. Doris went out to her car and came back with a paper grocery bag she had quietly assembled before they left town that morning. Bread, cheese, milk, butter, eggs, a jar of soup, a bottle of wine. Eleanor watched her unpack it onto the counter and felt the kind of gratitude that does not have words attached to it. While Doris started the fire in the fireplace, Eleanor walked through the rest of the cottage. There was a small bedroom off the main room with a neatly made bed and a quilt on it that her mother had made in 1962, the wedding ring pattern, the one she had assumed had been lost when her parents divorced. She sat down on the edge of the bed and put her hand on the quilt. The pattern was the same. The stitches were the same. He had taken it with him. For 61 years he had kept it on a bed in a cottage on the coast. There was a small bathroom that worked, when she ran the taps, with cold water from a deep well that had a particular mineral taste she remembered from her childhood. There was a narrow staircase that ran up the inside of the tower from a door at the back of the main room. The door to the staircase was locked. She tried the brass key in it. The key did not fit. The keyhole was older, smaller, the kind of keyhole that fit a flat warded key from the 19th century. There were 3 locked doors so far. The outbuilding, the staircase to the tower, and, she noticed, a small interior door beside the fireplace that she had taken for a closet, but that had a similar old keyhole. She stood in the middle of the main room and looked at the 3 locked things and the brass key that did not fit any of them. She walked back to the dining table where Doris had set out a plate of bread and cheese. She sat down. She did not eat yet. Doris. Yes. There are 3 locked doors in this house, and my key doesn't fit any of them. Doris took this in. Doris had the rare gift of taking in a piece of information and not immediately providing a theory about it. All right, she said. There are also someone's apples on the counter. All right. And my mother's wedding quilt is on the bed in the bedroom. Doris looked up at her then. Her face changed, a small softening. Oh, Eleanor. I know. Eat something. Eleanor ate a piece of bread with cheese on it. She ate it slowly, looking at the fire Doris had built, and after a few minutes she had the strange, settling sense that she had eaten food in this room before. She had eaten bread and cheese at this same table when she was 11 years old, the summer before the divorce, the summer she had spent 6 weeks at the Lighthouse with her father. She had eaten exactly this, at exactly this table, in front of exactly this fireplace. She remembered the bread had been from a bakery in New Harbor that her father had driven to once a week. She remembered the cheese had been from a farm in Bristol. She remembered the wine, though her father had not given her wine, had been the same kind he was drinking, a local muscadet from a little vineyard he favored. He had stocked this kitchen the way he had stocked it when she was a child. Or someone had. After they finished eating, Doris washed the dishes and Eleanor walked once around the inside of the cottage with the kerosene lamp from the mantel, looking at the things on the walls. There was a photograph in a frame above the fireplace of her father as a young man in a Navy uniform. There was a barometer beside the front door. There was a small painting of the lighthouse over the kitchen sink that she did not recognize the artist of, but that had been done with skill. There was a shelf of books along the wall between the bedroom door and the bathroom, books on navigation, on local history, on bird identification, on the history of New England lighthouses, on shipwrecks of the Maine coast. The last book on the shelf was a photo album. Black, leather-bound, the kind a person buys to hold a particular set of pictures. She took it down. She sat in the armchair by the fire and opened it. The first page was a photograph of herself at 4 years old, in a yellow dress, on the steps of the lighthouse, with her father standing behind her in his keeper's uniform. The photograph was labeled in pencil in her father's hand. Eleanor, summer 1956. The second page was a photograph of her at 5, in the same yellow dress, gone a little tight at the shoulders. The third page was at 6. The album was photographs of her, year by year, from the year she was 4 to the year she was 12. After 12, there was a gap of several pages. Then there were photographs of her in newspaper clippings. Her high school graduation, her college graduation, her wedding photograph from the local paper. A picture of her in the paper the year she had won a small civic award for her work on the Historical Society. Each clipping was dated. Each was preserved with care. After the clippings, there were photographs of her children. Vance as a baby in a newspaper announcement she had sent her father. Adrienne as a baby. Vance as a Little League player. The picture cut out of the Portsmouth Herald the year he was 9. Adrienne in her cap and gown at high school graduation. That photograph also from a paper. He had been keeping track of her. Of all of them. For 69 years. She closed the album. She put it back on the shelf. She did not cry, because she had wept everything available to weep in the days since Adrienne's call about the closing. But she sat in the armchair for a long time with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the fire. Doris. Yes. Tomorrow we need to find a locksmith. All right. And we need to find out who else has a key. All right. That night, Eleanor slept in the small bedroom under her mother's wedding ring quilt. Doris slept on the daybed in the main room with her purse on the floor beside her and an iron poker from the fireplace within reach. They did not need the poker. The night passed without incident. The wind off the ocean rose and fell. Once Eleanor woke at 2 in the morning because she thought she had heard a footstep on the gravel outside the cottage, and she lay perfectly still, listening, until she understood that the sound she had heard was the cottage itself settling in the cold, the timbers contracting against the stone foundation, the way old houses speak when the temperature drops. In the morning, she got up before dawn and made coffee in her father's kitchen using her father's beans in her father's grinder, and she sat at her father's dining table with her father's mug, which she had washed and turned right side up out of the saucer, and she watched the gray Atlantic move under a sky that was beginning to come pink at the edges. Around 7, Doris came out of the daybed and stretched and announced that she was going to drive into New Harbor for breakfast supplies and a locksmith. Eleanor agreed. Doris left. Eleanor sat alone in the cottage for the first time. She walked to the locked staircase door at the back of the main room and put her hand flat on it. The door was solid oak. Old. The hinges had been recently oiled, which was the kind of detail that did not fit a house that had been empty for 8 months, but did fit a house that someone was maintaining. She knocked on it with her knuckle, the way you knock on a wall to find a stud, and the sound that came back was the dense, packed sound of wood with something on the other side of it. She walked to the small door beside the fireplace and put her hand on that one. Same kind of door. Same kind of hinge. Same kind of lock. She had spent enough of her childhood with her father to remember that he had been a man who used the same hardware on every door of his house because he liked things to match. The keys, then, would also match. The keys would be the same kind of key, somewhere, and they would not be the modern brass key in her pocket. She thought about where her father would have kept old keys. She walked to the kitchen. In the drawer to the left of the stove, where Walter had always kept the kitchen junk drawer in their house, and where, she felt with the strange certainty of inherited habit, her father would also have kept it, she found a tangled small collection of small objects. 2 screwdrivers, a pair of pliers, a box of stick matches, a coil of fishing line, a stub of pencil, a glass marble that had clearly been there for decades. No keys. She tried the drawer below it. The drawer below it held tea towels. She tried the drawer to the right of the stove. The drawer to the right of the stove held a wooden box about 6 inches square with a hinged lid and no lock. She lifted it out. Inside the box, on a bed of red felt that had gone slightly thin with age, were 4 iron keys. 4. Each one tagged with a small brass plate, and on each brass plate a word had been stamped. Tower, parlor, shed, and the 4th, the one she paused on, was not stamped with a place. It was stamped with a single word that made her sit down very slowly at the kitchen table. Eleanor. She stared at the key. It was identical in size and shape to the other 3. An old warded key with a long shank and a flat bow at the end. The brass tag was the same kind as the others. The stamping had been done with the same set, the letters slightly uneven, the way letters are when someone has stamped them by hand with a metal die. The word was clean. Eleanor. He had labeled a key with her name and put it in a box with the keys to the rest of the house. As if it were one more room he was keeping for her. She did not know yet what the key opened. The box had 3 doors that were locked, and 3 of the keys were labeled for those doors. The 4th key was for something else. Somewhere else. She did not move for a long time. She sat at the kitchen table with the 4 keys in front of her and waited for the inside of her chest to settle. When it had settled, she picked up the key labeled Parlor and walked over to the small door beside the fireplace. The key fit. The lock turned with a clean, oiled feeling, as if it had been used recently. She pushed the door open. What she saw on the other side was not a closet. It was a room. It was a small room, about 10 feet square, with a single window in the seaward wall that she had not noticed from outside the cottage because the window was set into a wing of the cottage she had taken for a chimney mass. The window faced the ocean. The light coming through it at this hour, the slanted 7:30 light of an October morning on the coast, fell across the floor in a clear pale rectangle. The floor of the room was hardwood. The walls were paneled in wood and lined with bookshelves on 3 sides, ceiling to floor, and the shelves were full. She did not look at the shelves first. She did not look at the shelves because at the center of the room, on a heavy oak table that ran the length of the wall opposite the window, was a brass instrument the size of a small cat. It was a sextant, a very old, very polished, very obviously valuable sextant, the kind of brass instrument that even Eleanor, who knew nothing about navigation, recognized as the work of a craftsman from another century. Next to it on the table was another sextant. And next to that, a chronometer in a wooden case. And next to that, what she thought was a barometer but was, on closer inspection, an instrument she did not know the name for, with a glass face and a system of small wheels and pointers inside that she could not interpret. The table held about a dozen brass instruments altogether, each one polished, each one labeled with a small handwritten card. Sextant, Henry Hughes and Son, London, 1847. Provenance documented. Sextant, Carey, London, 1812. Provenance documented. Marine chronometer. Thomas Earnshaw, London, California, 1805. Provenance documented. Hadley's quadrant. American, CA 1780. Origin, Salem, Massachusetts. She read each card. She moved down the table slowly, reading each one. Some of the names she recognized as maker's marks because Walter had been an amateur student of antiques and had owned books that mentioned them. Most of the names she did not recognize. The dates she did recognize. The dates went back 250 years. Each instrument had its card. Each card said provenance documented. She turned to the bookshelves. The bookshelves were not full of books, although there were books on some of the shelves. Most of the shelves held bound folders, leather-bound, dark green, each one with a small label on the spine in her father's hand. Each label was a name and a date. Carey, 1812. Earnshaw, 1805. Hughes, 1847. The names matched the instruments. There was an entire wall of these folders. She walked to one of them at random, pulled it down, and opened it on the table beside the chronometer. Inside the folder were documents, photographs, receipts, letters, a bill of sale from 1962 from an estate auction in Marblehead, Massachusetts, a letter from a maritime museum in Mystic, Connecticut, dated 1974, confirming the authenticity of the piece. A series of photographs showing the chronometer from various angles in various states of restoration. A short note from her father in pencil on lined paper, dated August 1981, that described the work he had done on the brass case to restore the original lacquer. It was a full provenance package, the kind that any serious dealer or museum would require to confirm an object's authenticity and history. Eleanor closed the folder and stood very still in the middle of the parlor and looked at the wall of folders and the table of instruments and the strip of morning sun coming through the window onto the floor. Her father had built a collection. He had built it carefully across decades, with documentation, with research, with the careful patience of a man who knew what he had. He had built it, and he had stored it in a locked room behind a locked door in a cottage attached to a decommissioned lighthouse on a rocky shelf on the coast of Maine, where no one in the world but he had known it existed. And he had labeled a key with her name. She did not know yet what the value of the room was. She did not have any way to estimate it. She knew that brass marine instruments from the 18th and 19th centuries were sometimes worth thousands of dollars each, because Walter had once shown her an auction catalog from Skinner in Boston, and she had been startled at the numbers next to single pieces. She knew that this room held a dozen instruments at minimum. She knew it held documentation for each one that was extensive enough to constitute its own archive. She did not know the value, but she knew the room was not nothing. She knew the room was not sentimental. She went back to the kitchen and picked up the key labeled Eleanor. She walked back into the parlor and stood in the middle of it and looked at the walls. There was no door other than the one she had come through. The walls were paneled in wood. The bookshelves were built in. The fourth wall, the wall that was not a bookshelf, was where the door from the main room was. She put her hand on the paneling, where her father would have put a hidden door if he had wanted to. She tapped along the wall behind one of the bookshelves. The sound was hollow at one point and solid at another. The hollow point was in the corner, behind the lowest shelf, where a person on hands and knees could fit if they were small. She knelt down. Her knees protested. She had not knelt on a hardwood floor in some years. She put her hand on the back of the bookshelf in that corner. The wood gave slightly under pressure. There was a latch somewhere. She could feel the give of it through her palm. She pressed harder, and the back panel of the shelf swung inward on a hinge she had not seen, revealing a small dark space about 3 feet square. In the small dark space was a stout iron strongbox, the kind with a flat top and a single keyhole and 2 handles on the sides. Eleanor reached for it. She pulled it toward her on the wooden floor. The box was heavy. It was the kind of heavy that meant either it was made of very thick iron, which it might have been, or it contained something dense, which it might have. Both could be true. She pulled it out of the wall and onto the floor in front of her and put the key labeled Eleanor into the keyhole. The key fit. She turned it. The latch released with a click that sounded loud in the small parlor. She lifted the lid. The inside of the box was lined with red velvet, the way an antique jewelry case is lined with red velvet. The velvet had not faded much. Whatever was inside had been protected from light. On the velvet, laid in 3 neat rows of 6, were 18 gold coins. Eleanor sat on the floor of the parlor with the box in her lap and looked at them. They were not modern coins. They were the kind of coins that had irregular edges, that had been struck individually by hand, that had a face on one side that did not match any face she had ever seen on money. They were old. They looked, to her untrained eye, very old. Beneath the tray of coins was a folder. She lifted the tray, careful of the coins. The folder underneath was thin. It contained 6 pages of typed text and a single handwritten letter in her father's hand. She did not read the typed pages yet. She read the letter. Eleanor, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am dead and you have come to the lighthouse, and you have found the parlor in the box. I had hoped you would come while I was alive. I hoped this every year from 1980 till last spring. You did not come, and I understood, although I will not pretend it did not hurt me, because it did. I want you to know that I never blamed you for the years. I blame myself. I will tell you about that when you have read all of this. There is a great deal here. She stopped. She set the letter down on the floor beside the box. Her hands were shaking, and she did not want to read the rest of the letter with shaking hands, because the words were her father's words, and her father deserved to be read with steady hands. She stood up. She walked to the kitchen. She poured herself a glass of water and drank it slowly, holding the rim of the glass with both hands. She set the glass on the counter. She went back to the parlor and sat down on the floor next to the iron box and picked up the letter again. Outside the cottage, the wind off the ocean rose and the gulls were calling, and the morning sun moved a hand's width across the floor of the room. Doris had been gone for 35 minutes. Eleanor was alone in the cottage. She was alone with her father's letter and her father's collection and her father's coins and the 4 keys he had labeled and the bowl of apples on the counter and the quilt her mother had made in 1962 on the bed in the bedroom. She was alone in a way that, for the first time since Walter had died, did not feel like loneliness. She felt her father in the room, not in the sentimental way that people sometimes feel things in rooms, in the practical way that she had known him to be a man who left instructions. He had left instructions everywhere in this room. The keys were instructions. The labeled instruments were instructions. The bound folders of provenance were instructions. The letter in her hand was an instruction. He had been preparing for her to come for 45 years, and she had not come, and he had kept preparing anyway, and now she was here, and he was telling her what he had built. She began to read. The handwritten letter was 4 pages on the same lined notepaper her father had used for the provenance notes in the green folders. The handwriting was older and slower than the writing in the album captions, more spread out, with the careful effort of an old man who had not lost his hand entirely, but who knew that what he wrote would have to be legible to someone who had not been around to ask him questions. She read it slowly. Eleanor, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am dead and you have come to the lighthouse, and you have found the parlor in the box. I had hoped you would come while I was alive. I hoped this every year from 1980 till last spring. You did not come, and I understood, although I will not pretend it did not hurt me, because it did. I want you to know that I never blamed you for the years. I blame myself. I will tell you about that when you have read all of this. There is a great deal here, and I am writing this in pieces because I do not have long stretches of time when my hand works. Let me first tell you what is in the lighthouse, so that you know what you are standing in. Then I will tell you why. The parlor where you are sitting holds the brass instruments. 12 of them. They are the finest things I owned. The oldest is the quadrant from Salem from around 1780. The most valuable, in current market terms as of last spring, is the Earnshaw chronometer. I have written you a catalog. It is in the long top drawer of the table. Take it out when you finish this letter. The tower above us holds the charts. 246 of them, from the 17th century through the 19th. Most of them are sea charts of the New England coast and the Atlantic. Some are world maps. The most valuable is a Dutch portolan from 1632 that I bought from a private collection in Amsterdam in 1971. The chart room in the tower is climate-controlled. I built the system myself in the 1980s. It still works. I had Henrik check it last month. The shed, the building outside, holds the larger artifacts. Ship's bells, 2 anchors from coastal wrecks, a complete signal lamp from a French frigate that ran aground at Mount Desert Rock in 1842. The lamp is the only intact one of its type still in private hands. The strongbox in the wall is the coins. 18 escudos from the Concepcion wreck off the Dominican coast. I did not dive on the wreck. I bought the coins from a legitimate salvage operator named Mendoza in 1985. The provenance for each coin is in the bottom of the box, in the white envelope. They are gold. They are also history. Sell them carefully. Henrik is the man who has been keeping the lighthouse. His name is Henrik Alto. He is 54 years old. He lives in a small house on Russell Avenue in New Harbor. He has been my apprentice and friend for 26 years. He restored most of the brass with me. He knows where everything is. He has a key. He has been coming once a week since I died to make sure the climate system runs and the roof is sound. I told him to stop coming on November 1st if you had not appeared by then. You have appeared. He will come tomorrow morning at 9. I told him about you. He knows you may not know him, but he will know you, because I described you to him every week for 2 decades. Tomorrow I will tell you the value. Today I will tell you why I did this. Eleanor, I left your mother in 1968 because I was not the kind of man who could stay married to a woman in a town. I am sorry for that. I will not pretend I am not. I knew it before I married her. I told myself the marriage would change me. It did not. After the divorce, I could not have you full-time because I worked at sea for the Coast Guard until 1972 and then at the lighthouse here, alone for the most part, and a child cannot live alone with a man in a lighthouse on the coast of Maine. I knew that too. So I let your mother have you, and I saw you summers, and I tried to write you letters in the winters that did not sound like a man making excuses, although that is largely what they were. By the time you were 16, you had become a young woman with a life of your own in your town with your mother and her new husband, and I had married Inga, and we had not had children, and I was, with you, a kind of stranger you saw twice a year. I did not know how to be different. Inga tried to tell me. Inga said for years that I should write you more, that I should call you, that I should come down for the holidays. I did not listen to her. I listened to my own habits, which were the habits of a solitary man, and the habits won. They usually do, when you do not fight them. When you got married in 1971, I gave you a stiff speech because I did not know what else to say to a daughter at a wedding. I have thought of that speech with regret every year since. I should have said that I had loved you when you were 3, and I had loved you when you were 6, and I had loved you when you were 11, and I would love you for as long as I had a heart that worked. I did not say that. I said something about partnership. I did not know how to talk. When Vance was born, I sent a check, because I did not know what else to send. When Adrienne was born, I sent a check. When you wrote me, twice in the 80s, asking if I would come down for one of the children's birthdays, I wrote back with apologies and another check. I knew, even at the time, that I was doing the thing I had always done. I was making the smallness of my participation in your life feel deliberate, when in fact it was only cowardice. I did not know how to be present. I had not learned it as a young man, and I did not learn it as an old one. I am telling you this so that you will know I knew. Whatever you may have thought about me across the years, you should know I knew. I was not under the illusion that I had been a good father to you. I was the kind of father who sent checks. I was the kind of father who let his only child raise her own children without him. I was the kind of father who, when his daughter's husband died, wrote a letter of condolence and did not come. You should know one more thing. I started this collection in 1973. The first piece was the Carrie Sextant. I bought it at a yard sale in Camden from a man who did not know what he had, for $36. I knew what I had because I had been a navigator in the Coast Guard for 6 years before I came to the Lighthouse, and I had used instruments like it, and I knew what they were worth even then. I had it appraised. It was worth $400. I did not sell it. I cleaned it and put it on the windowsill of the parlor and looked at it for a year. And then I started looking for the next one. I want you to understand. I did not start the collection because I wanted to be rich. I started it because I had something to do with my evenings that did not involve drinking. I had been drinking too much in the years right after the divorce. The instrument stopped that. There is something about brass and small parts and patience that takes the place of whiskey if you let it. I gave up drinking, and I started restoring brass, and the years moved on. But somewhere in the 80s, I realized that what I had started for one reason had become valuable for another. The instruments I was buying, often for very little, were the kind of things that had a market. A small market. A specialty. But a market. I started to research what each one was worth. I started to keep records. I started to think about what would happen to all of it when I died. That was when I started this. The keys, the labels, the box with your name. I started this when Vance was 8 and Adrienne was 4. I had been collecting for 10 years, and I had a few dozen pieces. I built the parlor. I built the shelves. I built the box and the hidden door. I labeled the keys. I labeled one key Eleanor. I built it because I had not been able to give you anything else, and I knew it. And I wanted you to have something from me that could not be denied. Something I had built with my own hands across the years. I had not been around to give you anything else. I did not know if you would ever come to find it. I hoped you would. I knew you might not. If you are reading this, you have come. That is enough. I will not say any more about my regrets in this letter. The catalog and the rest of the practical pages are in the table drawer. Henrik will explain what he knows. Sylvia Crane will explain the rest. She is my attorney. Her number is on the inside cover of the catalog. Adrienne does not know about her. Sylvia has the second copy of the will. She is the executor of a separate trust that holds only this property and its contents. Adrienne was the executor of the rest. Adrienne does not know that what is in this lighthouse was not part of the general estate. Do not let anyone tell you that what is here was part of your father's general estate. It was not. I separated it in 2014, after Walter died, and I noticed that Adrienne was the one writing me to ask about my will. I separated it because I did not want her, or her brother, or anyone else, to touch it. I separated it for you. Eleanor, I will close. The room you are sitting in is yours. The lighthouse is yours. The contents of the lighthouse are yours. They were always going to be yours. They were the only thing I ever made that was worthy of you, and I am only sorry I made it instead of being a better father in the years when you needed one. I love you. I have loved you since 1952. I will love you after. Tom Whitlock. P.S. Inga made the wedding ring quilt for you. She wanted you to have it when she finished it in 1962. We never sent it because we did not know how to. It has been on the bed for 61 years waiting for you. I hope you sleep under it tonight. I hope you slept under it last night. The bed is in the small bedroom. Eleanor put the letter down on the floor. She did not move for a while. The strip of morning sun had moved another hand's width across the floor. She could hear the wind outside and the ocean below the cliff and the small contracting sounds of a cottage warming in the morning light. She could hear her own breath. She could hear her own heart in her ears the way you sometimes can in a quiet room. She had slept under the quilt last night. She picked up the typed pages. The typed pages were the practical inventory. 6 pages, single-spaced, organized by category. The first page was the brass instruments. Each piece was listed with its maker, date, provenance source, and 3 numbers, a low estimate, a high estimate, and a confidence number her father had added in pencil. The numbers were in current dollars and had been updated. The date at the top of the page read September 2024. The total at the bottom of the page, for the 12 brass instruments alone, was a number Eleanor read 3 times to be sure. $240,000 at the low estimate. $420 at the high. She set the page down. The second page was the charts. 246 charts, broken into categories. Coastal charts of New England, world maps, rare portolains, instructional charts from naval academies, hand-drawn charts from individual captains. The total at the bottom of that page was larger than the first. The Portolan from 1632 alone had a number next to it that Eleanor could not at first parse, because she was reading too fast, and she had to stop and read it again, slowly, the way you read a sentence in a foreign language whose grammar you were still learning. The third page was the larger artifacts in the shed. The signal lamp from the French frigate had its own number. So did the ship's bells. The total was modest in comparison to the first 2 pages, but still substantial. The fourth page was the coins. 18 escudos. Each one had its own line, with the date of strike, the mint mark, the condition grade, and the appraised value. The grades ranged from extremely fine to mint state. The total for the 18 coins was its own kind of number, and Eleanor sat with that number for a minute before she moved on. The fifth page was the books. The shelves she had glanced at and not yet examined held, it turned out, a small collection of rare maritime books, several of which had auction comparables her father had attached. The numbers were smaller than the others, but they were not nothing. The sixth page was the summary. The summary gave a total. Low estimate, high estimate, and underneath, in pencil, in her father's hand, 3 additional words. This is yours. Eleanor read the total at the low estimate. She read it again. She put the page down on the floor beside the letter and got up and walked to the kitchen and poured herself another glass of water and drank it standing at the sink, looking out the kitchen window at the lighthouse tower against the October sky. She did not know how to think about the number. The number was the kind of number that does not, in the first hour you encounter it, attach to anything specific in your life. It was too large for that. It was the kind of number that you read and then have to set aside in order to do the next ordinary thing in front of you, which in Eleanor's case was rinsing out her glass. She rinsed the glass. She set it on the dish rack. She went back to the parlor and sat down on the floor beside the iron box and looked at the 18 coins on the red velvet. She picked one up. It was heavier than she had expected. Gold is denser than most metals, and a gold coin the size of a quarter weighs more than you anticipate. The face on the coin was a man in a wig. The reverse was a coat of arms. The edges were uneven, as if it had been cut from a thin sheet of gold and pressed with a die rather than milled. She thought, holding it, that it was the kind of object a child would have called magic. She thought that her father had probably held this same coin and thought the same thing, and that he had probably held it more than once across the 40 years he had owned it, and that this was the first time it had been held by anyone but him. She put it back on the velvet. She heard Doris's car coming up the dirt road. Doris had brought back, in addition to the groceries, 2 unexpected things. The first was the locksmith, a thin man in his 60s named Royce Pettingill, who drove a panel truck with Pettingill lock and security hand-lettered on the side, and who had been the locksmith for the area. He explained to Eleanor as he stood in the mudroom taking off his cap, since 1979. He had known her father. He had cut keys for her father across many years. He had not been told her father had died, until that morning, when Doris had come into his shop on a tip from the woman at the general store. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Hadley," Royce said. He said it without performance. He said it the way men of his generation said hard things, briefly and without elaboration. "Thank you. I came because Doris said you had 3 locked doors, and I had 3 of the keys in my book. You have my father's keys? I have copies. Your father had me make duplicates of his interior locks in 1984 when he installed them. I keep a key book for all my clients. I have copies of the keys to the tower, the parlor, and the shed. I do not have a copy of a key labeled with your name." He held out a ring of 3 iron keys. Eleanor took them. She looked at Royce. "Thank you," she said. "I have the keys for those 3 doors. I found them in a drawer." "All right, but I appreciate you bringing these. I would like to keep them." "They're yours," Royce said. "I'm not going to need them. What do I owe you?" "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Hadley. Your father paid for these 40 years ago. He paid the original cut and the duplicate fee and a small annual retainer to keep them in my book. The retainer ran out the 1st of October. I should have notified you. I didn't know how to find you." He paused. "Your father was a particular man," Royce said. "He paid for things 40 years in advance. He told me once that he didn't trust the future to remember him. I told him I would. I was sorry to hear about him." Eleanor did not know what to say. She thanked him again. He nodded and went back to his truck. Through the window, she watched him drive away. The second unexpected thing Doris had brought back was the woman from the general store, who was named Lynette Carmody, who was 68 years old, who had known Eleanor's father for 31 years, and who had ridden up from New Harbor in the passenger seat of Doris's car because she had insisted, after Doris had explained who Eleanor was and why she was at the lighthouse. Lynette stood in the doorway of the cottage with her hands in the pockets of her barn coat and looked at Eleanor for what felt like a long time. "You look like him," she said. "Do I?" Around the eyes. He had that same way of looking at a room. "I knew it was you on the road yesterday afternoon when you came through the village. I just didn't put it together until this morning." She came inside. She did not look at the locked doors or the photo album or anything else. She looked at Eleanor. "I am going to tell you something, Mrs. Hadley, and then I am going to leave, because you have a great deal to think about today and you do not need a stranger telling you stories. But I want you to know one thing. All right. Your father had a picture of you on the wall in the lighthouse. Up in the tower, on the wall by the chart table. A picture of you when you were about 10 years old, sitting on the steps of the cottage. He kept it there for 40 years. He showed it to everyone who came up to see the tower. I was up there with my husband in 1994. We were the local volunteers for the Historical Society. Your father walked us through the whole tower. When we got to the chart table, he stopped and pointed at the picture and said, 'That's my daughter Eleanor.' He said it the same way he would have said it if you'd been waiting in the next room." Lynette paused. "I don't know what happened between you and him," she said. "I only know that he never stopped saying you were his. He said it to me at least 4 times across the years. The last time was about 3 years ago, when I delivered groceries here because his car was in the shop. He pointed at the picture and said, 'My daughter Eleanor.' Same as the first time." She turned to go. "Mrs. Carmody." "Yes. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. I came because somebody had to say it. The man loved you. I don't know how he was as a father. I only know what he said when he talked about you. I wanted you to hear that. That's all." She went out to the car. Doris drove her back down the road. Eleanor stood in the open doorway and watched the Buick disappear into the scrub pine. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. When Doris came back, Eleanor was sitting at the kitchen table with the typed pages and the letter and the catalog from the table drawer in front of her and 3 iron keys on the table beside them. Doris sat down without taking off her coat and looked at Eleanor's face and then looked at the papers on the table. "How are you?" Doris said. It was not a question. "I'm shaking a little." "All right. There's quite a lot here, Doris. I gathered." Eleanor pushed the summary page across the table to her. Doris read it. Doris was not a woman who reacted demonstratively to numbers, having spent 26 years as the assistant manager of a small credit union and having seen many numbers in her life. She read the page twice, set it down, and looked at Eleanor. "All right. That's a low estimate. I can read, Eleanor." "I know. What did the letter say?" Eleanor pushed the 4 handwritten pages across the table. Doris read them. She read them slowly, the way she would have read a will or a deed, and when she was done she folded them carefully and put them back where they had been on the table. "Eleanor." "Yes. You need to call Sylvia Crane this morning, before anything else, and you need to call her from this kitchen phone, not from your cell phone, because I do not want any record of this call going through any phone that Adrienne can see a bill for." "All right. And then we need to call this man Henrik. He's coming tomorrow." "That's tomorrow. We're calling him today. I want to meet him before we open another door." Eleanor nodded. She picked up the catalog from the table. The catalog was a small leather-bound book about the size of a wallet, the kind of book her father had clearly bought for the purpose, and the inside front cover had a single name written on it in pencil. Sylvia Crane. Crane and Whitfield, followed by a phone number. Eleanor walked to the kitchen phone, an old wall-mounted unit with a long coiled cord that she remembered from her childhood, and dialed the number. A pleasant woman answered. Eleanor gave her name and asked for Sylvia Crane. The pleasant woman said, "Hold one moment, please," with the slight pause of a person who had been told to expect this call. A second voice came on the line. It was the voice of a woman in her late 60s or early 70s, warm but practical, the voice of someone who had been doing this work for a long time and had not lost her interest in it. "Mrs. Hadley." "Yes. This is Sylvia. Your father told me you might call. I was hoping you would. Are you at the lighthouse?" "I am. And you have found the box?" "I have." A small pause. "I am very glad. He worked on this for a long time. May I ask whether you have read the letter? I have. All right. Then I will tell you what I know on my end. Your father came to me in 2014, the same year he separated this property and its contents into a standalone trust. I am the trustee. I have the original deed, the original trust documents, the certified provenance binders for every item in the collection, and a current updated insurance schedule. The contents are insured. They have been insured continuously since 1989. The insurance company has a current copy of the master inventory. All right. What that means, in practical terms, is that there is no question about your ownership of these items. There is no question about their authenticity. There is no question about your right to sell them, donate them, hold them, or do anything else you wish to do with them. The trust is independent of your father's general estate, and your father's general estate has nothing to do with this property or these contents. Eleanor sat down at the kitchen table with the phone cord stretched across the room. My daughter Adrienne is the executor of the general estate. I am aware. She told me the Lighthouse was part of her father's estate. She told me it was a sentimental property of small value. I know what she told you, Mrs. Hadley. Your father expected her to say something like that. He prepared the trust precisely so that what she said would have no bearing on what you owned. Does she know about the trust? She does not. The trust is recorded as a separate legal entity. It does not appear in your father's probate paperwork because it is not part of his estate. She would have had to specifically search for separately held property in your name to find it. She did not search. She accepted your father's general will at face value, which was that the Lighthouse was bequeathed to you, full stop, and she did not inquire as to what Lighthouse included as a matter of property contents. What does she think is in it? From a conversation I had with her in March, when she called me only because my name appeared on a property tax document for the Lighthouse, she believes it is a decommissioned tower with an attached cottage that contains some old furniture and a few personal effects of your father's. She was satisfied with that description and did not pursue the matter further. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Why didn't she just sell it? She asked. Because, Mrs. Hadley, your father transferred ownership of the Lighthouse property to you, not to the estate. It has been in your name since 2014. Adrienne has no authority to sell something that has been your property for the past 11 years. She told you what was in your will because she had no other choice. Eleanor sat with this. It has been mine for 11 years. It has. And I did not know. You did not know. And the contents? The contents are held in trust for your benefit. The trust does not transfer ownership to you outright. I am the trustee. The trust pays the insurance and the property taxes from a small dedicated account your father funded. The contents will pass to you outright on the day you instruct me to dissolve the trust, which I am authorized to do at your written request. Until then, they remain technically the property of the trust, but the trust exists for your sole benefit, and you are the sole beneficiary. Eleanor closed her eyes. Mrs. Hadley, I'm here. There is one more thing your father asked me to tell you when you called. He asked me to tell you that he was sorry he had not done it differently. He asked me to tell you that the way he chose to give this to you was the only way he had been able to think of, given the circumstances. He asked me to tell you that he hoped, if you read his letter and you came to find the box, that you would not think of this as a posthumous gift, but as something that had been yours for a long time, and that he had only been holding in safekeeping. Eleanor did not say anything. I will be glad to drive up tomorrow, if you would like, Sylvia said. I am in the county seat, about an hour south. I can be at the Lighthouse by 10 if that is convenient. I can bring all the original documents. I can also bring a release form if you would like me to begin notifying the appraiser and the insurance company of your presence. The appraiser is named Marjorie Lattimore. She has done all of your father's appraisal work since 1996. She lives in Portsmouth. She can be at the Lighthouse the day after tomorrow if you wish. I wish. All right. I will arrange it. May I bring lunch? Eleanor laughed once, a small, surprised sound. Please do. They hung up. Eleanor sat at the table for a moment. Then she got up and walked to the kitchen and poured herself a cup of the coffee Doris had brewed while she had been on the phone. Sylvia? Doris said. Sylvia. What did she say? Eleanor told her. She told her about the trust and the property having been in her name for 11 years and Adrienne not knowing and the appraiser and Sylvia coming tomorrow. Doris listened without interrupting. When Eleanor had finished, Doris drank her own coffee for a moment. All right, she said. I want to be clear about something with you. Yes. Your children, when they find out about all of this, are going to behave in a way that may be very difficult. I want you to be ready for that. They are not going to be glad for you. They are going to be glad for themselves, which is a different thing, and you should not confuse the two. I know. They are going to try to involve themselves. They are going to ask to help. They are going to suggest that they need to be part of the process for your own protection. You will need to think about how you want to handle that. I know. And they are going to be very upset that the house was sold 3 days ago. Eleanor put her coffee down. The house. Eleanor, you sold the house to pay debts you didn't owe. They took your money. I'm aware. I don't know that there is anything to do about that. I am not a lawyer. But Sylvia Crane is a lawyer. You might ask her about it tomorrow. There may be options. Eleanor nodded slowly. The thought of the house, which she had not thought about for the past 3 hours, came back to her with a small piercing sharpness. The cherry sideboard, the rocking chair, the garden Walter had loved. She had walked out of that house yesterday morning believing it had been sold to a young family from Boston for a price that would, after the various deductions, leave her with nothing. She had believed she had no recourse because she had signed papers, in her own hand, that she had not understood. But she had a separate property worth more than the house. She had had it for 11 years. She had not known. She did not know yet whether knowing changed the situation with the house. She did not know whether the closing could be undone or whether the money was recoverable. She did not know whether the durable power of attorney could be revoked or whether the accounts that had been emptied could be restored. She did not know any of those things. But she knew that the conversation with Sylvia Crane would include them. She knew that she had, for the first time in 18 months, a foothold of her own. All right, she said to Doris. Let's call Henrik. The number was on a card stuck to the door of the refrigerator with a small magnet shaped like a brass compass. Eleanor took down the card. The name was written in her father's hand. Henrik Alto, a New Harbor exchange. She dialed. The man who answered had a soft, slightly accented voice. Northern accent, Scandinavian inflection, Maine cadence layered over the top of it. He sounded surprised when she gave her name, and then he sounded glad. Mrs. Hadley. Eleanor, please. Eleanor. I am Henrik. I have been hoping you would call. My father said you would come tomorrow. I will come whenever you would like. Tomorrow, today, an hour from now. Would you come now? I will leave my house in 5 minutes. I will be there in 20. Thank you. She hung up. She turned to Doris. He's coming. Good. While they waited, Eleanor opened the tower door with the iron key labeled tower. The key turned with the same oiled feeling as the parlor key. The door opened on a narrow stone staircase that spiraled up the inside of the tower. She climbed it slowly, holding the iron handrail. The stairs were clean. The walls were dry. A small wire ran up along the stone, the climate control system her father had mentioned in the letter, with a thermostat at each landing. The tower had 2 rooms. A chart room on the lower level, where the spiral stairs opened onto a landing, and the lantern room at the top, where the original beacon had been removed in 1984 and replaced now with a small empty plinth where, Eleanor saw with a private intake of breath, a single-framed photograph stood on a small wooden stand. She walked over to it. It was a photograph of herself at 10 years old, on the steps of the cottage, in a blue dress, sitting beside a cat she did not remember, but whose name, she felt with sudden certainty, had been Mooney. She remembered the cat then. She remembered Mooney. She remembered her father had named the cat after a man he had served with in the Coast Guard who had been killed in a navigation accident in 1965. She had not thought of Mooney in 60 years. The photograph was in a simple wood frame. The wood was the same dark green as the trim on the cottage windows. She turned slowly in the lantern room and looked out through the windows. The glass was very old. The view was the entire arc of the coast on either side of the point. To the north, the open ocean. To the south, the long curve of bays and inlets that ran toward Pemaquid. The horizon was a clean blue line. She stood there for a moment. She went back down to the chart room on the lower level. The chart room was lined, like the parlor, with shelves. The shelves held flat wooden cases the size of large books. Each case had a label. Eleanor pulled one out at random and opened it on the chart table in the middle of the room. Inside was a single chart on heavy linen-backed paper, hand-colored, the kind of object that had not been made by a machine in any part of its production. The chart was a map of the Gulf of Maine dated 1742. The colors were soft from age. The lines were precise. She closed the case carefully and slid it back onto the shelf. There were 246 cases on the shelves of the chart room. She heard a vehicle in the gravel turn around below. Henrik Alto was a tall, narrow-shouldered man with white blonde hair gone to gray and a face that had spent its life outdoors. He wore work boots and a canvas coat and carried, in a battered leather satchel, 3 things he set down on the dining table when Eleanor came down the spiral stairs to meet him: a clipboard with handwritten maintenance logs, a ring of keys, and a small framed photograph that he held in both hands. He saw Eleanor and stood very still. "Mrs. Hadley. Eleanor. Eleanor." He swallowed. He set the photograph on the table beside the others. The photograph in his hand was a picture of her father, taken not long before his death, sitting at this same dining table, in this same cottage, with his hand on the back of a small black cat. The cat was looking up at the camera. Her father was smiling slightly. The light through the window in the photograph was the same light through the window now. "He gave this to me 3 months before he died," Henrik said. "He told me to bring it to you when you came. He told me to give it to you and to say that the cat's name was Halifax, and that the cat had died the same week he did, 3 days after, of old age. He told me to say that he had been a good cat, but not as good as Mooney." Eleanor sat down at the table. She put her hand over her mouth for a second and then took it away. "You knew my father very well. I worked for him every Saturday for 26 years. I lived with him for the last 3 winters. My wife had died and his wife had died, and we were both alone in our houses, and he asked me one fall if I wanted to come up here for the winter and help with the brass. I came that winter, and I came the next winter, and I came the 3rd winter. I went home to my house in New Harbor in the summers. I came back every Saturday year-round and every day of the winter. He never told me. He never told you most things, Eleanor. He told me. He told me about you all the time. He talked about you the way men talk about something they have lost and cannot stop thinking about. He talked about your children. He talked about your husband. He cried once after your husband died, when he had been drinking a little, which he did not do often. He cried because he had not gone to the funeral. He said he had been a coward. He said he had been a coward all his life about you, and that he was tired of being a coward but did not know how to stop." Henrik paused. "He said he was going to write you a letter. He wrote that letter for 2 years. He rewrote it 5 times. The version you have read is the 5th version. The first 4 are in a drawer in the chart table upstairs, with a note on top saying not good enough. I read all of them. The 5th was the one he could stand." Eleanor was crying now, silently, with her hand on the edge of the table. Doris reached over and put her hand on Eleanor's other hand, and neither of them said anything. And Henrik stood at the head of the table and looked at the photograph he had brought and waited for Eleanor to be ready. After a while she wiped her face and looked up. "Henrik." "Yes." "What is the value of what's in this lighthouse? At today's market, with the documentation your father built, and including the coins, between $2.4 and $3.1 million. That's the low estimate. That is the low estimate. And the high? The high is somewhere between 3.8 and 4.5, depending on whether the Port Ohlon and the Earnshaw chronometer hit the top of their respective markets at the right auction. The Port Ohlon has not been to market in 50 years. It is impossible to predict exactly." Eleanor sat with the number. She had read it on the page already, but hearing it spoken by a man who had spent 26 years building it with her father made it a different number. It was the same number. It had a different weight. "My daughter believes this property is worth, at most, the assessed land value, which is $190,000. Yes. She does not know any of this exists. No, she does not. Your father was clear about that. My son does not know either. No. My father wanted me to have this without their knowing." Henrik was quiet for a moment. He sat down across from Eleanor at the table and set the photograph of her father between them. "Eleanor," he said, "I am going to tell you what your father told me last fall, when he gave me my final set of instructions. He said, when Eleanor comes, she will come because her children have done something to her. They will have taken what they could take. They will have left her with the lighthouse because they will have decided it was nothing. They will be wrong, and Eleanor will discover they were wrong, and when she does, she will have to decide what to do about them. I do not want to make that decision for her. I want her to have the resources to make it on her own." Henrik paused. He was a thoughtful man. He saw it coming. He saw what coming. He saw your children. He saw what they were like. He saw it without being able to do anything about it because he was not in your life, and he had given up the right to be in your life many years before, and he knew that if he tried to warn you, you would not have listened to him. Eleanor closed her eyes. He was right about that, she said. I would not have listened. He knew. They sat for a moment. All right, Eleanor said. Tomorrow we are meeting with Sylvia Crane. The day after tomorrow we are meeting with an appraiser named Marjorie Lattimore. Today I would like to ask you to walk me through the lighthouse and show me everything. I want to see what my father built. I want to know what is in this place that has been mine for 11 years. Of course. And Henrik? Yes. Will you stay tonight? In the lighthouse? I have been staying here every Saturday night for 26 years. I have a small bedroom on the second floor of the cottage that you have not seen. I will be glad to stay. All right. I will make dinner. All right. He stood up. Let me start by showing you the tower, he said. Then the parlor in detail. Then the shed. We will not finish today. We will work through it in the order he intended. The order is in the catalog. Did you find the catalog? I found it. Good. We will follow the catalog. Your father was a man who built things in a particular order. He wanted you to see them in that order. He believed that if you saw them in the right order, you would understand what he had been doing. Eleanor looked at the catalog on the table. All right, she said. Let's start. She stood up. She had not eaten breakfast, and it was now past noon. She did not feel hungry. She felt the small, clean alertness of a person who has been given a task to do that is large enough to fully occupy her. She walked to the tower door with Henrik beside her and Doris a step behind, and together they went up the spiral stairs again, and Henrik began to show her, piece by piece, what her father had built. The afternoon moved through the lighthouse in a way Eleanor would remember later as a single uninterrupted stretch of attention. Henrik took her through the chart room first. He pulled cases from the shelves and opened them on the chart table and explained each one. He told her where her father had bought it, when he had bought it, what he had paid, what it was worth now, and why. He spoke in the careful, unrushed voice of a man who had taught the same material before and had no need to perform his knowledge. He showed her the Dutch portolan. The chart was in its own wooden case with a glass insert that allowed it to be viewed without being touched. The vellum was 400 years old. The hand-drawn coastline of North Africa was the work of a Dutch cartographer named Jan Jansonius, whose name Eleanor had never heard before that afternoon, and whose price at the most recent comparable auction Henrik recited from memory. He showed her the chart from 1742 she had pulled out at random. He told her the cartographer's name and the publishing house and the small detail in the lower corner that distinguished it from the more common second edition. Eleanor listened. She did not absorb everything. She absorbed enough. At 3 in the afternoon, they came back down to the parlor, and Henrik walked her through the 12 brass instruments and the wall of provenance folders. He pulled folders down. He showed her the receipts and the photographs and the letters from museums and the appraisal updates. He showed her the small notes her father had written, in pencil, on lined paper, about the work he had done on each piece. Some of the notes were long. Some were short. All of them were dated. Her father had kept records of this collection for 43 years. At 5 they went out to the shed. Henrik unlocked it with the third iron key. The shed held the larger artifacts in carefully built wooden cradles, each piece tagged. The signal lamp from the French frigate was bigger than Eleanor had imagined, 3 feet tall, brass and glass, polished to the same depth as the instruments in the parlor. Henrik told her the story of the wreck. He told her about her father driving down to a private estate in Connecticut in 1992 to buy the lamp from a man whose grandfather had recovered it from the wreck site in the 1870s. He told her about the months of restoration. He showed her, on the underside of the brass base, a small mark her father had stamped, the letters TW followed by the year of restoration. 1993. At 6 they came back inside. Henrik began making dinner. Eleanor and Doris sat at the dining table and watched him cook, and Eleanor felt a quiet she had not felt since before Walter died, the quiet of being in a house where someone competent was preparing a meal and the work of the day was done. That night, after Henrik had cooked dinner and Doris had gone back to her room, and Henrik had gone up to his small bedroom on the second floor, Eleanor sat alone in the armchair by the fire with the photo album in her lap and looked through it again. She did not look at the photographs this time. She looked at the order of them. She looked at how careful her father had been to leave space for each year. She looked at how he had numbered the clippings. He had built this. slowly, across decades, while she had been raising children and managing a household, and being a wife and a widow and a grandmother and a daughter who did not visit. He had built it for her. She closed the album. She turned off the lamp beside the chair. She walked to the bedroom, and she lay down under her mother's wedding ring quilt. She thought about her daughter Adrienne, who at this hour was probably at home with Jeffrey, having dinner, perhaps already in pajamas. She thought about her son Vance, who at this hour was probably at his own home with Brenna and the girls. She thought about the closing on the house on Sycamore Lane, which had occurred 3 days ago. She thought about the money that had been moved out of her accounts. She thought, for the first time in 3 days, that what had been done to her was not yet complete. There was still time to respond. There was still a Sylvia Crane to call again in the morning. There was still a Marjorie Lattimore to meet the day after. There was still an entire lighthouse full of objects that had been hers for 11 years. She did not need to decide tonight what to do about her children. She did not need to decide tonight what to do about the house. She did not need to decide tonight what to do about any of it. Tonight, she only needed to sleep. In the morning, Sylvia Crane would come. And after Sylvia, Marjorie. And after Marjorie, the slow, careful work of deciding what to keep and what to sell, and what to do with the money that would come of the selling, and the slow, careful work of deciding what to say to her children, and when, and how, and on what terms. She thought about her father, who had spent 43 years building all of this, and who had labeled a key with her name in 1985, and who had waited every year from 1980 to last spring for her to come, and who had never come. She thought she would have liked to thank him. She thought she would have liked to walk into the parlor while he was still alive, with him sitting at the workbench polishing a piece of brass, and to put her hand on his shoulder and to thank him. She had not done that. She could not do it now, but she could do the next thing. She could be the kind of person, in the time she had left, who took what he had built and used it the way he had hoped she would. She could be the kind of mother whose own children would not be able to do to her again what they had already done. She fell asleep with that thought intact. Outside, the wind rose off the ocean, and the lighthouse stood on its rocky shelf where it had stood since 1879, and inside the cottage at the base of the tower a small woman of 73 slept under a quilt her stepmother had made for her in 1962 and never sent. Eleanor woke at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of Henrik in the kitchen, the small specific sound of a man trying not to wake anyone while making coffee. She lay in the bed for a few minutes under the quilt and listened. She heard the kettle. She heard the spoon in the canister. She heard the soft click of the gas burner. The sounds were the sounds of a household being run by someone who had been running it for a long time, and they were not, she realized, unwelcome. She got up. She dressed in clean clothes from her suitcase. She came out into the main room. Henrik was at the stove. He looked up. He poured her a cup of coffee without asking and set it on the dining table. Sleep all right? I did. Good. He went back to the stove. He was making eggs and toast and bacon, and the smell of it was the smell of a Sunday morning from 40 years ago, the kind of smell that had a date attached to it whether you wanted it to or not. Eleanor took her coffee to the dining table and sat down. The October sun was just beginning to come up over the rim of the ocean. The water below the cliff was the dark slate color it was before sunrise. Gulls were already moving above the cliff edge in the small constant motion of gulls who have not yet found anything to eat. She drank her coffee and watched the sun. After a moment she said, "Henrik." "Yes." "How long did my father know he was dying?" Henrik turned from the stove. He thought about the question before he answered it. "He had a heart event in March of 2023, he said. His cardiologist told him then that he had 2 years, possibly 3. He told me a few weeks later. He started writing the letter that summer. He died 11 months earlier than the cardiologist projected. He never told me he was sick. No, he never told me anything. He told me he didn't want you to come because he was dying. He said if you came, he wanted it to be because you came. He did not want it to be a deathbed visit. He thought that would be the worst version of the thing for both of you." Eleanor was quiet. "He was probably right," she said. "I think he was," Henrik said. "I told him so." He brought the eggs to the table. They ate together. Doris came down the stairs a few minutes later in her robe and joined them. They did not talk much. It was the kind of breakfast that does not require talking, and there were 3 of them at the table, and the morning was clear and cold, and Sylvia Crane was driving up from the county seat at this very moment with a folder of documents and a thermos of soup she had brought from home. Sylvia Crane arrived at 10 minutes after 10 in a small dark blue car. She was a tall woman in her late 60s, with white hair cut short and the practical clothes of a person who had spent 40 years in courtrooms and conference rooms and had not picked up the habit of dressing for appearances. She carried a leather briefcase and a quilted insulated bag and a small paper sack that contained, she said as she set them down on the dining table, a tin of cookies her granddaughter had baked the previous day. She looked at Eleanor for a long moment before she sat down. Mrs. Hadley. Eleanor. Eleanor. I have wanted to meet you for a long time. I'm sorry it took so long. It took the time it took. Sit down. Let's begin. Sylvia opened the briefcase and laid out on the dining table, in a careful sequence, the documents she had brought. The original trust agreement, in a leather binder. The certified copy of the deed for the Lighthouse property, dated July 2014, transferring ownership from Captain Thomas Whitlock to Eleanor Hadley outright. The current insurance schedule for the contents. The master inventory, updated quarterly since 1989. The certificates of authenticity for the major pieces. A small notebook in her father's hand that listed every transaction in the trust account since its inception. Eleanor looked at the deed first. The recording stamp was clear. The date was July 22, 2014. Her father's signature was at the bottom, slightly shaky but readable. Her name was on the top in capital letters. Eleanor Hadley. This has been in my name for 11 years, she said. 11 years and 3 months. I never received any property tax bills. They are paid by the trust. Your father funded that account in 2014 with enough money to cover taxes and insurance through 2034. There is a small surplus. We have been earning a modest amount of interest on the surplus. So I have owned this property for 11 years and have not had to pay a single dollar to maintain it. That is correct. Eleanor sat back in her chair. My daughter Adrienne is an estate planning attorney. She handles wills and trusts for a living. How is it possible that she did not find this in 11 years? Because she was not looking, Mrs. Hadley. She knew about the Lighthouse as a property your father owned. She did not know that the property and its contents had been transferred to you. The transfer was a simple deed transaction filed in the county registry where the property is located. She would have had to specifically search property records in this county under your name to find it. Most attorneys, when administering an estate, search records under the decedent's name. They do not search under the beneficiaries' names unless there is a specific reason to. So she searched under my father's name. Yes, and found nothing here, because by the time he died, this property was no longer in his name. How did she think the property would be conveyed to me then? Through the general will, which makes a sentimental bequest of, quote, the Lighthouse property at Wrack Point, end quote, to you. She read the will and saw the bequest and assumed the Lighthouse was still in his name and would pass through the estate to you. She did not check the registry. She did not need to, because the language of the will was inclusive enough that her reading was internally consistent. She was, on her own terms, simply executing your father's wishes as written. But the wishes as written were not the wishes as planned. They were not. The bequest in the general will was redundant. The property had already been yours for 11 years. Your father included the language as a kind of insurance, in case the trust paperwork was somehow missed, but he did not need it. The trust was sufficient on its own. Eleanor nodded slowly. She picked up the inventory and flipped through it. The pages were dense, but the listings were clean. Each item had its own line. Each line had a date of acquisition, a price paid, a current appraised value, and a confidence note. The total at the bottom of the inventory was the same total Eleanor had read on the typed pages from the strongbox, with the small additional note that it was current as of September 2024 and would need to be updated. She put the inventory down. Sylvia, I want to talk about the rest of it. The general estate. Yes. All right. Sylvia set the trust paperwork aside and opened a second folder. Let me tell you what I know, she said. And let me tell you what I have already begun doing, since you called me yesterday afternoon, because there were certain things that needed to be started immediately. All right. Your daughter Adrienne holds a durable power of attorney for you, executed in March of last year. She has used this power of attorney to make a series of financial decisions on your behalf, including the sale of your primary residence on Sycamore Lane, which closed 3 days ago. She has also moved funds from your joint accounts into accounts you do not have access to. She has changed beneficiary designations on your retirement accounts. She has, in summary, taken effective control of your financial life. Yes, I want to be very direct with you. Some of what she has done may be defensible under the broad authority of a durable power of attorney. Some of it almost certainly is not. The line between vigorous advocacy on behalf of a parent and the systematic exploitation of an elder for personal benefit is a line your daughter has crossed in at least 3 specific places I can identify from the documents Doris gave me yesterday. 3 places. 1. The transfer of $240,000 from your joint money market account to an account in her own name in February. There is no defensible reason for this transfer. 2. The closing of the house at a price approximately $70,000 below the appraised value, to a buyer who is the brother-in-law of her husband. The market rate of the house was clearly documented. The sale was undervalued. The buyer was a related party. This is a self-dealing transaction in the technical legal sense, which is a violation of fiduciary duty under any state's elder law statutes. 3. The transfer of the proceeds of the house sale, which closed 3 days ago, into an account in the name of a trust she created last year in your name without your direct involvement, and over which she has sole signatory authority. Eleanor looked at her hands on the table. How much? How much did she take? Yes. Across all the transactions I can document, approximately $620,000 in the past 18 months. The house sale proceeds, which are her largest single transaction, account for about $400,000 of that. The rest is a series of smaller movements over the months prior. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. My daughter has stolen $620,000 from me. That is the practical effect, yes. The legal question of whether it constitutes theft or fiduciary breach or undue influence or financial elder abuse under Maine law depends on which statute we proceed under. I have my own preference, which I will tell you in a moment, but I want you to understand the basic facts first. All right. Yesterday afternoon, after we spoke on the phone, I did 3 things on your behalf. I want to walk you through each of them, and you can tell me whether to continue, modify, or undo them. Is that all right? Yes. First, I filed a formal revocation of the durable power of attorney with the Cumberland County Probate Court. This is a notarized document terminating your daughter's authority to act on your behalf. As of yesterday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she has no legal authority to make any financial decision on your behalf. I notified her firm by certified letter and her email of record. She has not yet responded. All right. Second, I filed a notice of intent with each of the 3 banks where you have accounts, notifying them that the power of attorney has been revoked and freezing all account activity initiated by your daughter pending review. This means that any pending transactions she has initiated will not clear. It also means that you have temporarily lost access to the accounts until you can present yourself in person at each bank with proper identification, which I can arrange to happen this week. Doris has offered to drive you. All right. Third, I have begun the process of identifying and recovering the funds that have been moved over the past 18 months. This will take some time. It will involve subpoenas, forensic accounting, and probably litigation. I am prepared to handle this for you, on terms we can discuss, but I want to be clear with you that this is not a fast process. It will be 6 months at minimum. It will be a year if your daughter contests it, which she likely will. Eleanor took a breath. What about the house? The house is more complicated. The sale has closed. The buyer is, as I mentioned, your son-in-law's brother. He paid a below-market price, but he paid it in good faith reliance on your signature on the closing documents. The house is now legally his. Reversing the sale would require us to demonstrate fraud or undue influence in a way that would invalidate the closing, which is theoretically possible but practically very difficult. The buyer would have to be willing to unwind the deal. He is not going to be willing because he got the house at a discount. So the house is gone. The house is gone. The proceeds, however, are not gone. The proceeds are sitting in an account your daughter controls. Those proceeds are recoverable, and I believe they are recoverable in full. There is a very strong case for fiduciary breach in the structuring of the sale and the disposition of the proceeds. We can get that money back. Eleanor nodded. And Adrienne? Adrienne, as an attorney, is subject to the rules of professional conduct of the Maine bar. Self-dealing in Transactions involving a vulnerable parent is a serious ethical violation. If we file a complaint with the Bar Association, she will face an investigation. The likely outcome of that investigation, given the documents I have already reviewed, would be a suspension of her license for a period of 6 months to a year, possibly longer. Eleanor sat with that. I do not want to destroy my daughter's career. You do not have to file with the bar. That is a choice you can make. I am telling you it is available. Some of my clients in similar situations have used it as leverage, without filing, to negotiate a faster recovery of funds. Some have filed. Some have chosen to handle the matter entirely through civil recovery without bar involvement. What would you recommend? Sylvia looked at her over the top of her reading glasses. Eleanor, I do not make recommendations about how to handle one's children. That is not what I do. I tell you what is possible, and you tell me what you want. All right, but I will say this. Your daughter has had 18 months to come to you and apologize for any of what she has done. She has not done so. She has, instead, continued to take. She closed the house sale 3 days ago, knowing it would leave you with nowhere to go. She did this with full knowledge of what she was doing. She is not, in my professional experience, the kind of person who responds to gentleness. She responds to consequences. Eleanor nodded. What is your honest assessment of what will happen if I do nothing? If you do nothing, she will continue to manage your affairs as she has been doing. She will assume, from your silence, that you have accepted what has happened. She will likely place you in a care facility within the next 6 months and use the remainder of your resources to pay for that placement. By the time you are 80, you will have nothing, and she will have most of what was once yours. That is the trajectory you are on if nothing changes. All right. Eleanor sat for a moment. Henrik was at the kitchen counter making more coffee. Doris was sitting in the armchair by the fire with a book open in her lap. Outside, the morning had clouded over, and the light through the windows was a softer gray than it had been at breakfast. Sylvia. Yes. Pursue the civil recovery in full. I want every dollar back that she has taken. I want the power of attorney to remain revoked. I want the funds in her trust accounts in my name returned to me directly. I do not want to file with the Bar Association unless she refuses to cooperate. If she cooperates, I will not file. If she does not, I will. All right. And Vance, your son is not currently named in any of the documents in a way that would expose him to liability. He may have been involved informally, but I have no evidence of that. He may also have been kept in the dark by his sister, which is also possible. I do not know. All right. What about communication with them? I would recommend that you communicate with them only through me, for the time being. You can decide later whether to resume direct contact. For now, anything either of them says to you may end up in court testimony, and you do not want to be in a position where you are managing your own evidence. All right. And one more thing, Eleanor. Yes. You should know that the moment I filed the revocation of the power of attorney yesterday, the clerk's office stamps these things and notifies all the relevant parties through their official channels. Adrienne would have received notification by close of business yesterday at her office email address. She has known since yesterday afternoon that her authority has been terminated. Eleanor was quiet. She has not called me, she said. No, she has not called you. She has not called me either. She is, in my experience, calculating what to do next. Will she come here? She might. I cannot predict it. She knows where the lighthouse is. She knows you have come here. She probably does not yet know what is in the lighthouse, but she may know enough to be concerned. If she comes, I would recommend that you not engage with her substantively. Tell her to communicate through me. Refer her to my office number. Do not let her into a conversation about specifics, because she will use that conversation in any subsequent legal proceeding. All right. You can be cordial. You can be brief. You can decline to discuss what is happening. That is all. Sylvia gathered her papers and put them back in the briefcase. She left several documents on the table for Eleanor. A copy of the trust agreement, a copy of the deed, a copy of the revocation of the power of attorney, and a sheet of paper with her office number, her cell phone number, and her after-hours number. She stood up. Eleanor. Yes. You are not the first woman in your situation I have met. You will not be the last. The thing I have learned, after 40 years of doing this kind of work, is that women in your situation do better when they understand that the answer to the question of what to do next is almost always the same. The answer is, you do the next thing. You take the next step. You do not have to solve the whole problem in a day. You only have to do the next thing. Thank you. Marjorie will be here tomorrow at 11. I will not come back unless you call me. Call me when you need me. She left. Doris closed her book. Henrik finished making the coffee. Eleanor sat at the table with the document Sylvia had left for her and looked at the deed with her name on it, recorded on the 22nd of July, 2014, and felt the strange double sensation of having lost something the day before yesterday and having owned something far larger for 11 years without knowing. Marjorie Lattimore arrived the following morning at exactly 11 o'clock, driving a small white station wagon with the back full of cardboard tubes and padded envelopes and a leather case the size of a small suitcase. She was a small woman in her early 70s with gray hair tied back in a low knot and the patient, unhurried movements of a person who handled fragile things for a living. She had been her father's appraiser since 1996. She had known her father, she told Eleanor, better than most people had. She did not waste time on pleasantries. She set up her camera and her lights in the parlor. She unpacked her measuring instruments and her loops and her notebooks and her checklist forms. She put on a pair of white cotton gloves. She began with the brass instruments, one at a time, and she worked through each piece with the focused attention of a person who was paid by the hour, but for whom the hours were the point. She had been at it for 2 hours when Eleanor brought her a cup of tea. Marjorie set down her loop and accepted the tea and motioned for Eleanor to sit down on the second stool by the workbench. Mrs. Hadley. Eleanor, I want to tell you something about your father's collection. Yes. I have appraised it for 29 years. Every 2 years, since 1996, I have come up here for 3 days and gone through the entire inventory. I have watched it grow. I have watched the documentation grow with it. I have, frankly, never seen a private collection of this quality and completeness in this region. There are larger collections. There are no better documented ones. Thank you. I am not saying this to flatter you. I am saying it because the value of what is here depends almost entirely on the documentation. The objects themselves are valuable. The documentation makes them more valuable because it removes every question a serious buyer might ask. Your father understood this. He built the documentation as carefully as he restored the objects. The result is a collection that any major maritime museum in the country would be glad to acquire intact, and any reputable auction house would be glad to handle piece by piece. And the value at the high end of the market is, in my professional opinion, significantly above what is in last spring's appraisal. Eleanor sat with that. How much above? I will know more precisely tomorrow when I finish. My preliminary estimate, based on what I have seen this morning, is that the collection has appreciated somewhere between 15 and 22% since the September appraisal. That is the brass alone. The charts I will assess this afternoon. The portolan in particular has moved up considerably. A comparable piece, smaller and less complete, sold at Christie's in London last June for a number that puts your father's piece into a different bracket entirely. She paused. I want to tell you one more thing. Your father told me, the last time I was here, in September, that you were going to come. He said that. He said, Marjorie, when you next come, my daughter Eleanor will probably be the one calling you. I asked him why. He said he had a feeling. He said his daughter would come when she needed to. He said when she came, I should treat her the same way I had treated him for 29 years. What way is that? Straight. No flattery. Real numbers. Hard answers when the answers are hard. He said you would not appreciate being managed, and he said I should not try to manage you. Eleanor smiled, the first full smile that had moved across her face in some days. He was correct. He usually was, Marjorie said, and picked up her loop again. Marjorie worked through the rest of the day and most of the next. She finished her on-site work at 3 in the afternoon on the third day. She would, she told Eleanor, have a complete written appraisal in her office within 10 business days, and would courier it to Sylvia Crane for distribution. The preliminary verbal estimate she gave Eleanor before she drove away was a number that, even by the scale of the previous estimates, made Eleanor sit down very carefully on the bench in the mudroom and put her hand on her chest. The total at the low estimate was $3.2 million. The high was 4.8. Marjorie had increased the September valuations by an average of 19%. The portolan and the Earnshaw chronometer had increased the most. The 18 escudos had moved up because gold itself had moved up. The signal lamp had stayed steady. Everything else had appreciated in line with the broader market for the category. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the cottage and watched Marjorie's station wagon disappear down the dirt road in the late afternoon light. She came back inside. Doris had been packing a small overnight bag. Doris had decided, the previous evening, that she needed to go home for 2 days to take care of her own mail and her own house and her own life. Henrik would stay. Eleanor would not be alone. Doris would drive back on Saturday. All right, Doris asked, watching Eleanor's face. All right, you'll call if you need anything. I will. And you'll let Sylvia handle them when they come. I will. Doris hugged her. Doris was not a hugging woman. The hug was brief and firm and felt, to Eleanor, like the kind of moment people did not generally have in their lives. The moment when an old friend who has carried you through a hard week sets the burden down for a moment and lets you carry yourself, knowing she will be back. Doris left. Eleanor and Henrik ate dinner together that night. They did not talk much. Henrik went up to his room early. Eleanor sat in the armchair by the fire with her father's handwritten letter in her lap and read it again. The second reading was a different reading. The first had been the reading of a daughter who had been startled by the existence of the letter. The second was the reading of a daughter who had understood, by now, what the letter was. It was an apology written across 40 pages of a small notebook over the course of 2 years and condensed into 4 pages of finished handwriting by a man who had known he was running out of time to write it. She finished reading. She closed her eyes for a moment. The phone rang at 9:15. Eleanor looked at it for 2 rings before she picked up. She had been waiting for it. Mom. It was Adrienne. Adrienne. There was a pause on the other end. A small, careful pause. The pause of a person who had not expected to be answered and was now adjusting her plan. Mom, I need to talk to you. I'm aware. Sylvia Crane has filed paperwork that has caused me a number of problems at work and with the banks. I think there has been a misunderstanding. I would like to come and talk to you, in person, so we can clear this up. Adrienne. Sylvia Crane is my attorney. Any communication about my affairs should go through her office. I am not going to discuss the situation with you directly. A longer pause. Mom, this is me. This is your daughter. We don't need lawyers between us to have a conversation. I disagree. Mom, Adrienne. Please call Sylvia. Her office number is on the documents she sent you. She is expecting your call. Good night. Eleanor hung up. Her hand was shaking. She set the phone down on the table and held her own hand still with her other hand for a moment. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel vengeful. She felt, more than anything else, the small, clean fatigue of a person who had just done a thing she had not known she was capable of doing. She turned out the light. She went to bed. The phone rang again at 6:30 the next morning. Eleanor did not answer. She listened to it ring 6 times and then go to the small old answering machine her father had mounted under the wall phone. Adrienne's voice came through the speaker, controlled and professional. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Eleanor lay in the bed under the quilt and listened to the message end. She did not get up to play it back. Adrienne and Vance arrived at the Lighthouse at 3:15 in the afternoon on a Friday. Eleanor was in the parlor with Henrik when they heard the tires on the gravel. Henrik had been showing her the conservation log for the Earnshaw chronometer, a small leather-bound notebook in her father's hand that recorded every cleaning and adjustment over 38 years. Eleanor looked up. Henrik, I hear them. I do not want you in the room. All right, but I want you near. I will be in the kitchen. He closed the conservation log carefully and stood up and walked out of the parlor, leaving the door open behind him. Eleanor heard him go into the kitchen. She heard him pour a cup of coffee. She heard him sit down at the kitchen table. She walked to the front door of the cottage and opened it before her children could knock. Adrienne stood on the steps in a wool coat and a charcoal scarf, her hair freshly cut, her face composed in the careful professional expression Eleanor had been seeing on her face for 2 years. Vance stood behind her, taller, paler, in a parka that did not quite fit the situation. He looked tired. He looked, Eleanor noticed, more tired than Adrienne. The way men look tired when they have been carrying the worry of something they did not start. Mom. Adrienne. Vance. May we come in? Eleanor stepped back from the door. She did not invite them in. She did not refuse. She simply made space and waited to see what they would do. They came in. They stood in the mudroom and looked around. Adrienne took in the coats on the pegs, and the stone floor, and the door into the main room beyond. Eleanor watched her daughter take it all in. Adrienne's expression did not change, but Eleanor saw the small recalibration happen behind her eyes. Adrienne had expected the cottage to be derelict. It was not derelict. It was the cottage of a man who had lived in it and kept it well, and even from the mudroom you could tell that. "Come into the main room," Eleanor said. She led them to the dining table. She did not offer them coffee. She sat down at the head of the table, facing the window with the ocean beyond it, and motioned for them to sit on the long side, which they did. Adrienne first, then Vance. "I came," Adrienne said, "because I think there has been a serious misunderstanding." "I don't think there has." "Mom, please." "Adrienne, before you say anything else, I want to be clear about something. I am going to listen to you for a few minutes. You may say whatever you came to say. When you are finished, I will respond. After I respond, I would like you both to leave. Any subsequent communication about my affairs needs to go through Sylvia Crane. Do you understand?" "Mom, do you understand?" A small pause. "Yes." "All right. Speak." Adrienne took a breath. She had prepared something on the drive up. Eleanor could see the shape of the prepared thing in her face. "Mom, I want to begin by apologizing if anything I have done in the past 2 years has felt to you like overreach. I have been trying to take care of you in the wake of Dad's death. I know it has been a difficult time for both of us. I know I have made decisions that, in retrospect, perhaps could have been made differently or communicated more clearly. I am sorry for that." Eleanor did not say anything. "The power of attorney was something we discussed at length. You signed it willingly. I have used it, as I understood it, in accordance with your wishes and your interests. Some of those uses, I can see now, may have been more aggressive than was strictly necessary. I am willing to revisit those decisions with you. I am willing to make adjustments." Continue. "The house. I understand the house has been a difficult conversation. I want to be honest with you. The sale was structured in a way that may not have served your financial interests as well as it should have. I was operating under time pressure, and I made some choices that I regret. The buyer is a family connection, which I should have disclosed more clearly. I am willing to discuss how to make this right." "How do you propose to make it right?" "I would like to repurchase the house from the buyer and convey it back to your ownership. He has indicated he would be willing to do this for the original purchase price, plus a small accommodation for his trouble." "How much accommodation?" $25,000. "So I pay him $25,000 more than I sold him the house for, and I get my house back." "That is correct." "From money that is mine." "That is correct." "From the proceeds of the sale, which are currently sitting in a trust account in my name that you control." Adrienne hesitated. She had not expected the question to come from this direction. "That trust account is meant to manage your funds for your care, Mom." "Yes, the proceeds went there. I can release them for the purpose of repurchasing the house." "You can release them?" "Yes." "As though they were yours to release." "Mom, the trust is yours. I am only the administrator." "The trust one did not know existed until 2 days ago. The trust one did not sign documents to create. The trust over which you have sole signatory authority. That trust." Vance shifted in his seat. He did not speak. He looked at the surface of the table. "Mom," Adrienne said, "I think we are getting into territory where it might be better if we had a conversation that includes my attorney." "You have an attorney." "I have retained someone to advise me." "Yes." "What is your attorney's name?" "Curtis Hammond." "Curtis Hammond's name you will please give to Sylvia Crane, who will be in touch with him directly. He and Sylvia will work out the terms of the recovery." "Recovery?" "Of the $620,000 you have moved out of my accounts since February of last year." The numbers sat on the table between them. Adrienne's face moved through several small adjustments before it settled into something that was not the professional composure she had walked in with. It was closer to the face of a person who had assumed the conversation would be along one set of lines and had just discovered it was along another. "Mom." "Yes." "How do you know that number?" "Sylvia told me." "How does Sylvia have that number?" "She has been going through the records since I called her 3 days ago." "Mom, I don't know what Sylvia has told you, but the situation is more complicated than a simple number like that suggests. There were taxes. There were expenses. There were Adrienne." "Yes." "Stop." Adrienne stopped. "I am not interested in your explanations. You will provide them to Sylvia, and Sylvia and Curtis Hammond will work out what you can substantiate and what you cannot. Whatever you can substantiate as legitimate expense incurred on my behalf will be deducted. Whatever you cannot, you will return. If you cooperate, This can be done quietly between attorneys. If you do not cooperate, I will file a complaint with the Maine Bar Association, and the resulting investigation will be a matter of public record that will affect your professional standing. A long pause. Mom, I am your daughter. I am aware. You would file with the bar against your own daughter. I would prefer not to. That is why I have given you the option to cooperate. If you cooperate, the matter stays between the lawyers and the banks. If you do not cooperate, it becomes a matter of public record. The choice is yours. Adrienne looked at her hands. She was not, Eleanor noticed, looking at Vance. She was not looking at Eleanor. She was looking at her own hands on the dining table, the rings on her fingers, the manicure that had been done recently and was already showing wear at the cuticles. What about Vance, she said. Vance is not named in any of the documents in a way that would expose him to liability. If he has assisted you informally, that is between you and him. I have no plans to pursue him. Vance looked up at Eleanor for the first time since he had sat down. Mom. Yes, Vance. I want you to know I did not know about most of this. I knew about the house sale. I did not know about the other movements of money. I did not know about the trust. All right. I should have asked. I did not. You should have. I'm sorry. Eleanor looked at her son for a long moment. He was 41 years old. His face had the small new lines around his eyes that men developed in their 40s. He had her father's coloring, her father's height, and at this moment, sitting at her dining table in a coat that did not quite fit the situation, he had something else that her father had, which was the particular sad expression of a man who had not done well by someone who deserved better. Vance. Yes. I accept your apology. I want you to know that I am not pursuing you, and I do not intend to. But I also want you to know that I will not be a regular part of your life again until I am certain it is safe to be. That means seeing my grandchildren on terms I set, not on terms Brenna sets. It means hearing from you when something happens, not when your sister has cleared the communication. It means treating me like a person who has a life of her own, not a problem to be managed. I will tell you when I am ready. I do not know when. That will be. All right. Adrienne. Adrienne looked up. I do not know whether I will ever be able to have you in my life again. That is the truth. I am willing to leave that question open. But I am not willing to leave it open while you continue to take from me. You will return what you have taken. You will not contact me again until Sylvia tells me that the financial matter is resolved. After that, if you wish to apologize in a way that is not also a strategic move, I will consider it. I do not promise anything beyond that. Adrienne nodded once. Slowly. Now, Eleanor said, I would like you both to leave. Henrik will see you out. Henrik, who had been in the kitchen the entire time and who Eleanor knew had heard every word, came in from the kitchen and stood in the doorway of the main room. He did not speak. He did not need to. He was a tall, narrow-shouldered man in work clothes, and his presence in the doorway was the presence of a person who would, if asked, walk two adult children out of a house, and Adrienne and Vance both understood this without it needing to be said. They stood up. Vance came around the table and stopped beside Eleanor's chair. Mom, can I? Yes. He bent down and put his arms around her. It was awkward. She was sitting and he was standing. It was the first time he had hugged her in over a year. He smelled the way he had smelled when he was a young man. The cologne he had worn since he was 18. The small specific scent that had been his since he had picked it out himself at a department store in 1989 on a trip with her to buy his first suit. She put one hand on his shoulder. She did not say anything. He let go. He straightened. He walked to the door. Adrienne walked past Eleanor without stopping. At the door, she paused, half-turned, but did not look at her mother. I will have Curtis call Sylvia on Monday, she said. Thank you. They left. Eleanor sat at the table for a long time after the sound of the car had faded down the dirt road. Henrik came in from the kitchen and sat down across from her. He did not speak. After a few minutes, he got up and put on the kettle. He made her a cup of tea. He set it in front of her. She drank it slowly. Henrik. Yes. Was that all right? It was very all right. I did not enjoy it. You were not supposed to. She nodded. She drank the rest of the tea. She set the cup down. What do we do next? Next, Henrik said, we have dinner. Then we go to bed. Tomorrow we keep working on the catalog. Sylvia will call Monday with whatever Curtis Hammond has to say. The next steps will reveal themselves. All right. Eleanor. Yes. Your father would have done it exactly the way you just did it. He would have been proud of you. She did not say anything to that. She sat with it. She drank her tea, which was now cold, and looked at the fire that Henrik had built in the fireplace, and thought about her father at the table in this room across the many years he had sat at it alone, and she thought he might have been proud, and that the possibility of it was enough. Curtis Hammond called Sylvia Crane the following Monday at 10 in the morning. He was a careful man, Sylvia reported back to Eleanor on the phone. He understood the situation. He understood, in particular, that Adrienne's professional standing was at issue. He had recommended, and Adrienne had agreed, to a structured return of funds that would conclude within 90 days. The full $620,000, less a small amount of substantiated expense that Sylvia had reviewed and found legitimate, would be returned to Eleanor's accounts over a series of transfers timed to avoid triggering tax events on either side. The house, separately, would not be recovered. The buyer had declined to unwind the deal at any price. The proceeds, however, were included in the funds being returned. By mid-January, Eleanor had her money back. All of it. She had also, by then, sold the first of her father's brass instruments, a sextant from 1812 that had gone at a regional auction in Boston for the high end of Marjorie's estimate. And she had begun, with Henrik's help, the slow, careful process of preparing the next several pieces for sale. She did not sell everything. She did not intend to. She had decided, somewhere in the weeks after the confrontation with her children, that what she wanted to do with the collection was not simply to monetize it, but to honor what her father had built. She talked it through with Sylvia and with Henrik and with Marjorie and with the curator of the Maritime Museum in Bath, a woman named Ingrid Berner, whom Marjorie had introduced to her in December. The plan that emerged, across the winter, was this. The brass instruments she would sell, slowly, one at a time, to fund her life and to fund the larger project. The charts she would donate, the great majority of them, to the Bath Museum as a permanent loan, with an exhibit named for her father and built around the documentation he had assembled. The Port-Oland she would auction separately at Christie's in London, where Marjorie believed it would draw international bidding and could fund the rest of the work. The coins she would sell to a collector network through Sotheby's. The signal lamp and the larger artifacts she would donate to a smaller museum in Mystic that specialized in maritime salvage. The lighthouse itself she would keep. She would live in the cottage. She would maintain the tower as her father had maintained it. She would use part of the proceeds from the sales to establish a small fund, administered through Sylvia's office, that would provide legal consultation, free of charge, to older women in Maine who found themselves in financial situations similar to her own. The fund would not be large at first. It would grow, she hoped, over time. Sylvia would administer it. Marjorie would sit on the board. Henrik would help with practical matters. Doris had agreed to serve as the connection to women in the community who might need it. The fund she would name for her father. The Thomas Whitlock Foundation for the Protection of Aging Women. The name was Sylvia's suggestion. Eleanor had wanted to call it something more modest. Sylvia had said, with the firmness of a woman who had spent 40 years in courtrooms, that the name should be exact, so that no one mistook what the fund was for. Eleanor had agreed. The first applicant came in late February. Her name was Iris Penniman. She was 79 years old. She lived in a small town near Bangor. Her son had used a similar power of attorney to take a similar set of resources. She had heard about Eleanor's fund from a friend of a friend at a senior center. She had called Sylvia's office, and Sylvia had called Eleanor, and Eleanor had called Iris back personally, and they had talked on the phone for 2 hours. Iris did not have a lighthouse. She did not have a hidden collection of brass instruments. She had a mortgaged house and a small Social Security check and a son who had been moving money out of her accounts for 3 years. She had no idea what to do. Eleanor told her what to do. She told her, calmly, in the order that Sylvia had told her, the things to begin doing. Then she connected Iris with Sylvia's office, and Sylvia took it from there. By June, Iris had recovered most of what she had lost. She had kept her house. She had a new power of attorney drawn up in favor of a niece she trusted. She had a small monthly check from the Whitlock Foundation that paid her property taxes. She wrote Eleanor a letter that summer. The letter said only that she had thought, for a year, that she was going to die in a state-run facility with nothing of her life left. She did not know how to thank Eleanor. She did not have words for it. She had wanted Eleanor to know. Eleanor read the letter in the parlor of the cottage, sitting at the dining table by the window, and she put it in the leather-bound folder where she had begun to keep the correspondence of the foundation, and she went on with her day. She lived at the Lighthouse from that first October onward. She kept the cottage. She kept the tower. She kept the photograph of herself at 10 that her father had set on the empty plinth in the lantern room, and she added, beside it, a photograph of her father at the same age, in a small frame she found in a drawer of his bedroom. The two photographs stood together on the plinth, side by side, looking out at the ocean through the old glass of the lantern room. And that, she thought, was a small mended thing, and small mended things were what a life mostly consisted of, in the end. She saw Vance in March. He drove up alone. He stayed for 2 nights in Henrik's old bedroom on the 2nd floor of the cottage, because Henrik had by then moved to a small house Eleanor had helped him buy in New Harbor. They did not talk about Adrienne. They did not talk about the money. They walked along the cliff, and they ate dinner together, and they sat by the fire in the evenings, and Vance asked her questions about his grandfather, which she answered from the letter and the journal and the photo album, and he listened the way a man listens to the story of someone he is sorry he did not know. He came back in May. He brought his older daughter, who was 10. He brought her up to the tower and showed her the photograph on the plinth and told her who the people in the photograph were. The girl listened with the particular careful attention of a child who has been told something important by an adult who is not used to telling her important things. Adrienne did not come. She had returned the money on schedule. She had not contacted Eleanor in any way other than through Curtis Hammond and then, briefly, through Sylvia. She had not apologized. She had not asked to see her mother. Eleanor did not know what would happen next with her. She had decided, in the spring, that she would wait. She would not chase it. If Adrienne came one day, she would consider what Adrienne had to say. If she did not, she would not. The lighthouse stood on its rocky shelf where it had stood since 1879. The cottage at the base of the tower was painted dark green in the trim and white in the siding, and the kitchen garden along the south wall grew tomatoes and basil in the summers and was put to bed in the autumns under straw, and the smoke from the cottage chimney went up against the sky in cold weather and was visible, on clear days, from the boats that came around the point. Eleanor was 74 years old. She had a home of her own. She had a foundation she was building. She had a friend named Doris and a friend named Henrik and an attorney named Sylvia and an appraiser named Marjorie and a curator named Ingrid and a network of women across the state of Maine whose names she was learning one at a time, who came to the foundation for help and who, increasingly, came also to the lighthouse for the simple reason of seeing it and seeing Eleanor and understanding what the foundation was for. She had what her father had built her. She had what she had built for herself out of what her father had built. She had the photograph of herself at 10 on the plinth in the lantern room, and the quilt her stepmother had made for her in 1962 on the bed in the bedroom, and the 18-karat smile of a Spanish king pressed onto 18 gold coins in a velvet-lined box that she had decided, in the end, to keep. She had the lighthouse. She had her name. She had the years remaining to her, however many they were, and she had a clear sense, now, of how she intended to spend them. She had not asked for any of this. She had not planned for it. She had only walked into a barn of a different kind, on a cold October morning, with nowhere else to go, and she had found, behind a locked door inside a locked door, something her father had built across 43 years with the steady, patient hands of a man who had not known how to be a father in any of the ways he might have learned, but who had, in the end, found one way that worked. She had come. He had been waiting. The rest of it was simply the work of carrying forward what had been left to her. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.